So the area around the Angelo informal settlement in Ekurhuleni, where that highly toxic gas leak claimed 17 lives, has now been declared safe. The gas is believed to have come from a cylinder in a shack in the settlement and is suspected to be linked, as you've been hearing, to illegal mining activity in the area. Expert toxicologist Dr. Gerhard Verdoorn joins us now to share his perspective on how and why this happened so quickly. Dr. Verdoorn, good evening to you and thank you for your time. There's some speculation about what type of gas this was and whether indeed it's linked to illegal mining activity. But let's talk about what we know and what can you share based on your specialist knowledge. The gas appeared to kill rapidly. Our producer says people were found to have passed on while they were doing ordinary things like watching television. What types of gases can do that?
Well, if I link it to the mining, then there are two possibilities. First of all, it can be some nitrogen oxide because that is used to formulate or to manufacture nitric acid, which is essential for gold mining. It can also be chlorine gas because you normally use a mixture of hydrochloric acid and nitric acid, which is called aqua regia, to extract the gold from the ore. Now, the media is quite scant with information, so we don't exactly know what the gas was, and there's an allegation that it's some nitrate oxide, which doesn't make scientific sense because nitrate is already an oxide of nitrogen. But if you think about the possibility of a cylinder with compressed nitric acid, that will produce something called NO2 or nitrogen dioxide, which is very toxic to people if they inhale it in a high quantity. So it has a pungent odor, so people will breathe it in, they will smell it, but by that time it'll be too late. It is extremely corrosive to the lungs and the alveoli, and if people inhale that, it will basically, you can say, digest the soft tissue inside the esophagus, the trachea, and right down to the alveoli and the bronchi in the lungs. And people like that stand very little chance of surviving at all. And if they survive, they're going to have some very serious long-term lung consequences. So the problem comes in that there are people in the country that get their hands onto toxic chemicals, which they should never get hands on. And like the Premier said, now we need to clamp down on these people because they are a risk to everybody. And it's very sad to believe that 17 people died and 10 more are in intensive care because of unleashing a toxic chemical in the hands of people that have no idea what they're working with. And that should only be at industrial level where people work with special protective equipment and not be in a shack somewhere in an informal settlement.
What would typically be associated with some of those gases you talked to us about earlier, nitrogen oxide, for example, in terms of its residual presence in the air, even though it's been declared safe?
There is a possibility for nitrogen dioxide still to be present in the air because, remember, it's also one of the combustion gases coming off normal cars and so on. So you can't discount the fact that the air will contain some nitrogen oxide. The good thing is that no one complained about burning ice, so that rules out the possibility of chlorine gas completely. So it points very strongly then to some form of nitrogen oxide, and it goes back to what I said earlier on. If it was compressed nitrogen dioxide or maybe even compressed nitric acid, that could have caused the problem. People very vividly spoke earlier on in the interview about the very bad odor and the pungent odor. So that points to me that we are on a track to finding the chemical culprit, in other words, some form of nitrogen dioxide. And if inhaled, then, like I said earlier on, the chances of that person surviving that level of gas, because remember, it's compressed in the cylinder. You can see the cylinder on the ground there. The white always indicates nitrogen and the red indicates toxic. So it's not just nitrogen gas, it will be nitrogen oxide. And therefore, that would have been very, very toxic and lethal to people. Normally, when you inhale the stuff, like from car fumes and so on, it will irritate your lungs. It might cause a bit of coughing and so on, but it won't be lethal to you. But in a concentrated form like that, if it is in cold air, like in the early hours of the evening without any wind movement, and it saturates the air, and people inhale the stuff, the prognosis for people is exceptionally poor.
So these were almost perfect conditions for something deadly and really bad to happen. And I'm so glad you were able to look at those visuals. And as you looked at that canister, would be able to say with some accuracy what that would be. It should not be stored in this way. It should not be there ideally, and typically how should it be stored?
No, gases like those, all those toxic gases must be in a special warehouse with special guards, special closures, special access control, locked up all the time under guard, under lock and key. And if transported by special transport, if taken to a factory where it's used for whatever purpose, must all be done according to certain acts. And there's many acts in the country that regulate all these toxic chemicals, all these what we call the highly hazardous chemicals. And clearly that canister was stolen from somewhere. It should not have been in the hands of anybody unless it was in a mining house where it was serving the purpose of being used for extraction of gold or other minerals. So that was illegal. And you can look at the scene there. If you look at the top of that gas cylinder, it was obviously compromised. And remember that gas is under massive, massive pressure in there. And that gas will possibly fill up a couple of thousand cubic meters of airspace. And remember, at night, there's a temperature inversion. In other words, the air is completely stable. There's no wind movement. The air will become saturated very rapidly. And even if people complain about the smell or the bad odor, by the time they become aware of the odor, it is technically too late because they would have inhaled a toxic level of that. And then the body starts shutting down. So you can't take up any oxygen if your body is saturated with those nitrogen oxides, and then you pass away.
Again, it sounds like an excruciating death. So we've got to do a couple of things, Gerhard. We've got to be able to give the community things that they can use in those environments. So if you see a gas cylinder which is of that type and those colors, that should be a red flag and a warning.
That should be red flag and warning. And what I would recommend to the people, since we saw that there wasn't a very good response from the police, still report to the police because they are our law enforcement agents, but also try and make contact with your local municipality. And I think for now, anybody in that area should make contact with the health officials in the Department of Health at the local municipality and report to them that they see funny things they like. If they see, for example, a drum of a chemical, or they see a canister like that, or a pressurized gas cylinder like that, report that to the authority, because they are the ones who actually implement Act 15 of 1960, the control of highly hazardous substances, and therefore it should be removed by a specialist company, one of the hazmat service providers, of which we have quite a few in the country, to take it out of the hands of people and to prevent this catastrophe from happening, because the only word for this is a catastrophe. It doesn't matter about the economic position of the people. It was a catastrophe. 17 people died. 10 are in ICU. Unacceptable for our country.
Just two quick things which are important. So, as you say, don't handle. If you see this type of canister, report it. Do not handle. What can someone in the community do to assist someone or even protect themselves?
There's not much you can do, because remember, even our reporter stood there with that mask. It's a gas that's in the atmosphere. So even a mask like that is not going to help you. So if there's anybody falling down or starting to show symptoms of not being able to breathe properly, is to take the person as far away as possible from the scene immediately, and to help the person to breathe properly. In other words, loosen up the clothing and help the people, even if you can help the people with some artificial respiration. But there's not much else you can do, because a normal gas mask is not going to help. For that type of gas, you would need to have a special respirator mask with the ABPKE filters that you put on, because those are the filters we need to separate the gas out from normal breathable air. There's not much else you can do. So the best is to take people away, shout or blare the alarm and evacuate the area completely, and call upon the health department and the police to come and investigate and help the people to get away from the area, because that's very important. No mask is going to help you when it's a gas like that.
So tragic and also so helpful, Dr. Gerhard Verdoorn. Thank you for talking to us tonight and sharing what you have. He is an expert toxicologist. If you see something like that, report it immediately.